has happened. This is Ukraine's capital. What seemed unthinkable in the 21st century is now underway. A democratic country has been invaded by its nuclear-armed neighbor on multiple fronts. People are not safe in their own homes. This apartment building in Kharkiv, Ukraine's second-largest city, was struck, killing at least one person. Ukraine's president said tonight 137 people have died, 316 others are wounded. It is a full-scale attack, forcing Ukrainians to decide whether to flee or to fight.
That was the news from exactly 4 years ago today, when the, what the West calls a full-scale invasion, what the Russia calls a special military operation, happened. And that she was right there, that who would have thought in the 21st century that that's something that we would be seeing. In my view, it was the war that should never have been. There were many off-ramps that you could have prevented war from coming. And I'm talking about going all the way back to 2014, 2015, and certainly right up before. But we didn't. Instead, here we are now 4 years later. And to try to talk about the significance of this and where it may be going next, we have with us the amazing Andrei Martyanov, veteran author and Russian military expert and host of the YouTube channel Smoothie X12. Andrei, as always, welcome back to the show.
Oh, my pleasure, always.
Well, listen, let me just kind of start where we were there. I mean, this is the 4-year anniversary. And I got to say, I did not think that we would be here today. 4 years after when this war started, I did not think that it would still be going on 4 years later. But I also didn't think that it would happen until about 5 or 6 months before all this stuff happened. It became pretty clear to me that we were heading down that direction, because I could see Russia making some buildup, and I could see the Ukraine and the Western side, especially the Biden side, doing everything they could to make sure there wouldn't be a negotiated settlement. How do you feel on this day, and do you think we should still be fighting?
Well, it is obvious that, as always, there was a miscalculation of the not only strategic, historical scale on part of the combined West. And you absolutely correctly stated that it was Biden administration which was utterly incompetent militarily, which was pushing for this, because obviously they didn't have the situational awareness that the United States doesn't, and whenever it conducts its own wars. And there is another issue, which, of course, we have to understand that when they use the full-scale trope, they don't understand what full-scale invasion would mean. But it is special military operations, and the first few, essentially until the first Ides of April, it was primarily demonstration of force, tour de force thing to convince Ukraine to get back to the negotiating table. And once this Istanbul happened, that's when the real special military operation started. Obviously, the negotiations with in Istanbul have been sabotaged by Biden administration and obviously Boris Johnson, who was the embodiment of this. And that's when the real special military operation started. That's actually the real effort to deal with NATO, because it became clear already in Istanbul in 2022 that it is a NATO war, and the United States was the main driver behind it, and of course Europeans. And so here we are today. What we have after these 4 years, we have essentially the complete annihilation of the essentially male population of Ukraine. Even CNN reported yesterday that that Ukraine is now the country of the orphans and widows, which is sad and horrible. But this is what happens when you have NATO and those people in this bottom group in Pentagon, in Brussels, who do not have a clue about modern warfare. And those fairy tales of usual Russian, before that there were Soviet dissidents, then there were Russian dissidents who told them, you just hear, repeating basically the Hitler's trope, you just have to kick the door and it will fly off the hinges, because they thought that, Russians wouldn't be fighting back or wouldn't be doing anything, and they thought that if they do something, that will be second Afghanistan. Obviously, they never studied what Afghanistan war was for the Soviet Union. And as a result, here we are today. Europe is on the brink of, it's not on the brink, it's collapsing. And all those things happening, which we have today, including with the Trump administration not understanding where it got itself into, we have the complete military defeat of the combined West. in collapse as the civilization, and we can see it everywhere. Indications, and not just indications, it's essentially everywhere. It's and United States is in a political turmoil. And what can I say? The demilitarization of NATO did happen. And no matter what the United States tries to support basically Nazi regime in Ukraine, which is the best proxy United States ever had. And it was defeated. And today, well, if you look at the operation, you can see yourself 12 kilometers away from the outskirts, southern outskirts of Zaporozhye. And they are deep now into the Slavyansk-Kramatorsk access, basically. And it's going to fall. After that, Mr. Witkov or Mr. Kushner can go around and pretend that there's some good news coming. Actually, Russian position hardened. And so, but when you actually, it doesn't matter that, whatever anybody says. The question is that Trump had the off-ramp offered by Russia on a number of occasions. He didn't take it. And so that's the result. So the decision will be military. But Russians will continue to do it, on a slow pace in order to minimize casualties. And Mr. Medvedev said as much yesterday. So that's it. Simple as that.
And I want to we were talking about the 4-year anniversary, but I actually want to back up a little bit before that, because there's something that happened at that time which has been bastardized at the most accurate, or mischaracterized as the most pleasant view on the West. And that is that we have always prided ourselves, many in the West have, that Russia did launch a full-scale invasion on the 24th of February, 2022, and it was only the incredible stopping force of the Ukrainian army with all of the stuff that the West had, and they have been mocked ever since, that they were going to take Kiev in 3 days, etc. But let me take you back to something that happened a little before that anniversary on the 5th of February, 2022, and you have this interesting little headline here. General Milley says Kiev could fall within 72 hours if Russia decides to invade. So that was not it's not Russia that said they would do that. It was our own chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff that said that. And didn't quite work out that way. But let me ask you a question, which is not often asked here. What does that tell you about the judgment capability of the United States, that we thought that it could fall within 72 hours? And as you've said many times on this show, the total number of troops that Russia had on all these, and I think it was a total of 5 different axes of advance where they entered into the country, was not even a fraction of enough to actually conquer the country, but it was to, as you just said a second ago, to compel compliance on a negotiated end to end the war so that we didn't have to get into the war we have now. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, General Milley, with all my due respect, he won't be able to command a brigade in Russian armed forces, and he obviously wanted to mock. There is definitely a degree of the professional rivalry, and he needed to set up the framework for the mocking Russians, and pretending that Pentagon knows better. They don't, and they never did. And the problem here with Milley and these 3 days is that he needs to go and study actually what was the recapture of the Kiev in 1943 by Red Army and what it takes to the city of the almost 3 million population, and especially with Russian modus operandi, which is written all over the place in the combat manuals, ranging from the platoon up to the brigade, and then of course operational manuals written for basically the operational tactical units from division up to a corps, which are classified that essentially minimization of the civilian casualties. And Vladimir Putin and Russia Security Council, they knew it. They knew that they have to avoid as much as possible the civilian casualties and attack strictly the military installations and armed forces of Ukraine. That is why, for example, we had Bucha, we had all those things. And primarily in the beginning, especially the whole 2022, it was these were attempts by Milley himself And not only Milley, you have Ben Hodges, you have all kinds of people, American generals, who were trying to reframe it in such a way that, oh yeah, Russians don't know how to fight. Look at us, we know how to fight. They lost all their wars, but they evidently are better than anybody else. And that was the main point. It was PR. It necessity to somehow frame the narrative in such a way as to provide some kind of the political and ideological, if you wish, and propaganda pressure on, as they think, Putin's regime, which they were expecting will become unstable. Then those Russians who love democracy and free markets, Russia is capitalist, and they will go and remove Putin from power. So then CIA gets this bunch of the creeps which they import into United States and Europe. They will put those creeps in power as they did in Ukraine. But of course, for many years now, they do not know what they're talking about. They simply do not have all those professionals. They do not have people who can grasp what was going on. And again, listen, I love records. I love records. In 2017, I wrote the book, Losing Military Supremacy, which actually warned. And then in 2019, I wrote another one, Real Revolution and Me, saying to people that essentially everything is basically from the entertainment industry. Real war is a completely different story. And when you have the completely different table of organization and equipment of the Russian armed forces, you cannot translate it or interpret it within the American way of war, which is primarily expeditionary warfare, with the low level of sustainment, realistically, against the very massive and, basically sustained campaign, such a special military operation. And as the result, we have this today's situation. Europe is in complete disarray. It has been deindustrialized. It is now paying energy. Granted, if the United States will be benevolent enough to provide them that energy, then they were getting from Russia. They essentially killed themselves by sanctions. And again, this is the parading of the military, political, economic, cultural incompetence of the combined West so-called elites and ruling class. And here we are. Russia is doing okay.
And let me ask you. So you mentioned a second ago that the war on TV is not the same as the war in person.
No.
But there has been a lot of TV actions really from the West trying to exchange that with reality, trying to convince us that is reality. And one of the best purveyors of that, we have to be honest, somebody who's really good on the camera is Volodymyr Zelenskyy. Now, you may remember that in the beginning, he solidified himself and just absolutely became the fawning favorite of the West when at the beginning of this conflict, he famously said, I don't want to ride out of Kiev. I need ammunition. But now, 4 years later, Zelenskyy said, I'm still here.
Some people, I think including President Trump, say Ukraine cannot win this war. Are they correct?
Where are you now? Today you're in Kiev. You're in the capital of our homeland. You are in Ukraine. I'm grateful for this. Will we lose? Of course not, because we are fighting for Ukraine's independence.
So, I mean, to an extent, he has a point. It's been 4 years. He's been saying all this nonsense before, but yet he is still in power. He is still in Kiev. What do you say?
Oh, it's first we have to understand that traditionally, especially modern Western mainstream media journals, first they are morons and they are people many of whom would be essentially thrown behind the bars during World War II as the war criminals, which they are. Especially British media, they are warmongers, and of course they run interference against the background of the Epstein files and what has been exposed about the ruling class in the West. But the point is that Russia in there, not for the territory. That's what those don't understand. They don't understand what is happening because as you go, even if you go into the military academy in West Point and U.S. Army War College, they never heard of Svechin. They never heard of the exhaustion strategy because again, they probably got their ideas about war from Gulf War I against the semi-literate Iraqi army, that it's not about big arrows, it's about physical annihilation of the, essentially, armed force. This already happened. And Zelenskyy is going to speak whatever he wants to talk about, but the issue here is very simple. He is very profitable for Russia, because while Russians have him, he essentially exterminates the male population of Ukraine. And I know it sounds horrible, but that's war. That's real war. This is not, type of you go into some kind of 20 days operation and overthrow some regime in the third world country. This is completely different. It's NATO, and he will continue to brag until, as Mr. Medvedev correctly stated yesterday, continuation of war for them, for Zelenskyy, his clique, and a number of other people, including from the West. It's the continuation of their lives. Once it stops, it's over for them. They will be gone.
And in fact, you mentioned Dmitry Medvedev. We actually have that video here where he does talk about what he thinks from the Russian perspective, what he thinks is the future for Zelenskyy.
Скажем прямо, если боевые действия заканчиваются, в лучшем случае удастся сбежать куда-то на территорию одной из предельных стран, там, не знаю, в Польшу, в Британию, там, в Европе, еще какие страны другие, которые предоставят убежище. А в худшем случае, да, свои же и повесят, прямо на Майдане где-нибудь. Судьба Бенита Муссолини и Адольфа Гитлера является абсолютно показательным примером, как и тех, кто был впоследствии предан суду, осужден, а во многих случаях казнен Советским Союзом.
So now many in the West will say, oh, that's just Medvedev, because he's always using a lot of hyperbolic language. He's wearing a uniform, but he was never in the military. So you can he's a clown. I hear that all the time. He's a clown. You can just dismiss him. Is that a safe bet?
Yeah, it is a safe bet. And again, those people who say otherwise, they know nothing about real warfare. They don't know nothing about real war, and they have no clue about the history of Russia, as I already stated, many times. And I understand. I dropped the corporate solidarity thing, about half a year, 8 months ago, when I started to look. I couldn't take it anymore when we saw what Mr. Donahue or Mr. Aguda, what kind of the planners those commands are with Baden Group, which is actually amateurish level of the operational this executed. So they can say whatever they want. Most of them, they won't be allowed to command a company in Russian armed forces, and they will be laughed out from the morning briefing on either battalion, let alone regiment staff. So I don't know, it's difficult to convince people because they literally, and we have to say it openly, they are simply not up to par. They are not educated enough. And of course, the United States armed forces, they simply have no experience with this, the scale of operations and how they are conducted, especially in technological aspect. With the exception of the American traditional strong point of the ISR, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, especially signal intelligence. But other than that, Russians are not impressed. Again, let's go back, 2023, counteroffensive. It was like a wowzer. People in the Russian military were just shocked, but that somebody could have come up with that and thinking that they could have, some kind of success. And that's the other point. They still do not understand that a political objective decides everything. Russia is not there to conquer territory, except for liberating whatever is remaining to liberate in around Slaviansk, Kramatorsk, and Donetsk Oblast, and of course Zaporozhye. The rest of it is liberated, and there's a little bit of Kherson left. And after that, Russians do not really need any additional territories because Russia doesn't want to take on its balance all those people, whatever is left in Ukraine, who hate Russia anyway, and want the free stuff, So, and it was stressed from the get-go. There are 4 new oblasts. It's not negotiable, period. It's there, accepted in Russian Federation, per Russian constitution, per proper protocol. The rest of it can go to hell, essentially. And so, obviously, Russians are deep now in the Kharkov territory. They are deep into Dnipropetrovsk. There's a lot deep in Sumy Oblast. And so they call it for now the buffer zone, and it will be expanding. But I don't think Russians really necessarily want those oblasts on their balance now. But everybody understands, anybody who has any clue about what real war is and how the policies and politics is built around it, is that their ball is rolling downhill already, because the political process started. And once those 4 territories, it doesn't matter if United States agrees to recognize it or not. Nobody cares if anybody recognizes it. Once it stops, after liberation of the remnants of this 4 oblasts, the Ukraine is done as their state. It's the political processes will start, and you saw yourself probably yesterday. There are some really stunning events happening in Lvov. These Western Ukrainians are beginning to fight those people who drafted them, well, which is primarily kidnapping them, and there's explosions, they're shooting at each other. So, Russians know you have to just push the ball down the road, and after that, it's gonna roll itself and it's gonna change everything. And some people in Europe and United States understand that, but the problem is that's what they do not understand. War is not PR. It's what actual events on the battle line which really matter. The rest of it is.
I want to go down a path that you started a second ago, talking about, and some may just say, well, you're being unnecessarily harsh on the Western leaders, et cetera, and on their inability to understand modern warfare. I'm going to show you a couple of things from the from the European side in a second about where they are diplomatically, but I want to set that up by. We're talking about the 4-year anniversary. In my view, one of the pivotal, if not the pivotal, disasters from the Western perspective came in the 2023 offensive against the Russian side. Now, that was preceded literally days before that started in June of 2023, on May 31st to be exact. General David Petraeus, who was at the time and unfortunately still is regarded as the most amazing sage general in American history, been the CIA director. He was a 4-star general, led the Iraq surge, led the Afghan surge, et cetera, and got credit for all this stuff. He stood there, and I don't have this video to show here, but you know it well, to where he sat there and he gave all kinds of detailed reasons why the Ukraine offensive would succeed and why the Russian defense would fail, crumble, crack, and even collapse, he said on that day. That's what he said before that happened. But what was your expectation on that same time before the offensive started? What did you expect?
I mean, I expected it to be defeated. I didn't expect it, at least with thought. And again, my friends who are still my friends, some of them are fighting, and they're senior officers. They're colonel level, they worked in the central apparatus, and we were thinking like, okay, they're gonna get to the first line of defense, and then they will be crushed. Nobody expected them to bog down, not even reaching the first line of defense. They bogged down what is called security zone. We knew it will be defeated. We just did know that it will be defeated with such a crushing force that they didn't even get to the first line of defense, because obviously there are 3 echelons. And again, listen, American way of war is very simple. 3 echelons as anywhere, the echelon of the breakthrough, which dies essentially, then the second one and then third exploitation, so, it's simple. It's classic, operations. Then in about 20-25 days, CIA shades the useful idiots. In the Russian case, it was the Prigozhin's mutiny, which was suppressed extremely fast, and they regime changed. The guys are one-trick ponies. They don't know anything beyond whatever is written in the field manuals, which are absolutely obsolete and useless. Petraeus he won't be able to graduate a real military academy in Russia. Forget about getting into what is the equivalent of war college, which is much harder academically, let alone Academy of the General Staff. He would be laughed at as the person who has no qualifications. He never commanded real armies, field armies, continental warfare. He doesn't understand what combined arms warfare is. None of the American generals, because they never understood how the interaction of the forces on the battlefield happens when you have to sustain casualties, when you have to sustain absolutely people who shoot back, and then suddenly you go out and every single long-range fire, field manual 3.3-0, operations, you are outranged and outpaced by everything. Those people don't understand that. He watched too much, many times, the movie Patton. He never studied the World War II. He doesn't understand how World War II was won. And so when you look at these people, good Lord, they are incompetent. That's what, basically, the moment you get beyond the brigadier general, people who still work in the OPDs, operation planning departments in Pentagon, who at least have a clue. And then, of course, we know that Petraeus was married very successfully, to the daughter of the superintendent of the U.S. Academy at West Point. So, I mean, he is a comical figure, as most of those Ben Hodgeses, Petraeuses, Kims, Kellogg's, and things like that. They are clownish figures. They are being openly mocked in Russia. And so
that's that's from the military perspective, and we now can know conclusively how disastrous that advice was. But now let's fast forward to where today we have. So I just showed you that soundbite of Zelenskyy a second ago. When he was asked, he said, "Can Ukraine win?" Or will Ukraine lose? I think is the question he put to him, and he said, "Of course not. We're going to continue going forward." Well, there was a comment, and I think this was, I think it was day before yesterday on Sky News. You had Sean Bell, who many in the West, of course, are going to put a good face on things, but even he couldn't put a very good face on that when he said this.
All of a sudden, in the last year, President Trump has turned that tap off, and I think in big handfuls, that's made life incredibly difficult for Ukraine. The West has tried to step up, but bluntly on the front line at the moment, Ukraine is gently losing. Russia is advancing slowly. It's paying an awful price, but as we stand, it's a very difficult time on the battlefields for Ukraine.
So they're gently losing. I've literally never heard that term used in military affairs, but what do you make of it?
Well, the military is a joke. It's I will quote Doug McGregor, for me not to be accused of Russian rah-rah, but he said Lilliputian force with their military academy Sandhurst is a joke. I mean, they don't have this Chatham House and MI6. These people are good only at terrorism. He wouldn't understand the first thing. Again, they tried to hire the admiral for the commander of their submarine forces using their LinkedIn. So that tells you everything. Of them. They're utterly incompetent, including all the best generals, you know why? Because we also saw how they killed 80,000, which they tried in Kursk. That's the British planning. The United States by that time primarily washed its hands off. And, they captured 159 square miles and killed 80,000 of those troops there. So you cannot teach them. They are unteachable. They do not understand anything. But even when this clown suddenly begins to recognize gently losing, it's not gently losing. CNN reported yesterday, as I already stated, they literally have nobody to draft from anymore. They kidnap people. There's TSK, which is the central for the essentially drafting. They have right now, evidently they're discussing, I don't know, maybe they already have it. They break the doors of the flats to drag whatever remaining male population hides there. But if you take a look at how they exist on the front lines, it's catastrophic. They have cholera now, outbreaks of cholera. They kill their own wounded. It's just all over the place. Russians do not mind. That's why they say, continue. Don't interrupt the enemy when it commits the mistake, makes a mistake. And this is what is happening. And as I already stated, the next big thing is going to be Zaporozhye. This is much larger than Mariupol. It's almost 800,000 population, probably less now because many Ukrainians basically evacuated from there. It's going to be a serious psychological, basically defeat for Ukraine. And after that, as I already stated, Mr. Medvedev is absolutely correct. We've been saying this all along, that eventually he will be hanged by his own basically mob. And when you look at the numbers which are provided, and only based on the Russian count, which is primarily frontline, because even there you cannot completely, count them, all of them. Mr. Rudskoy, the chief of the main operational directorate, in his interview to Red Star 3 days ago, he stated that, and he's talking about primarily killed and non-returnable sanitary losses, more than 1.5 million. So yeah, it's probably about 2.2 million KIAs alone and missing, and so it's a complete catastrophe there. And so again, that shouldn't have come to this, but Mr. Biden evidently and his lawyers, boys from like Sullivan and what his name there, Blinken. Yeah, they thought they knew better. They don't. They're just basically lawyers and political scientists. That's who they are.
Let's take a look now. With all of that said, and with those kinds of realities affecting the ground troops and what could come next, let's take a look forward at what we can expect later this year even. Now, there has just been another round of trilateral meetings between the United States, Ukraine, and Russia in Geneva, Switzerland. Now, after that meeting was over, there were some people that were asking in the Russian media, they were asking Sergei Lavrov and Dmitry Peskov, what about adding in the Europeans? Should we be talking to them too? Watch their reaction.
В каком статусе там в Женеве находились вот эти вот представители других европейских стран? Что они там делали?
Сугубо в своем статусе находились. Они сидели где-то в предбаннике, кофе пили. Нам пообщались друг с другом.
Там же потом украинцы с ними встречались, они их брифинговали, но на переговорах их не было.
И их там не ждут?
Мы не видим смысла в участии европейцев. Они ничем не могут помочь, учитывая их настроение. Вы только что упоминали главу европейской дипломатии с ее блистательными заявлениями. Чем они с такой позиции?
Yeah, hard to argue with that. I mean, we just talked about how the U.S. was so disastrous in the help of the militarily in the 2023 offensive. And you talked about how mainly the British were leading militarily in the Kursk offensive and how both of those militarily were just disasters, cost tens of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands altogether of troops. And then the European leaders want to talk and they want to say, we want a seat at the table too, should they have one.
No, I mean, Europe, United States was afforded off-ramp. It will not be afforded the role which Mr. Trump wants of the arbiter. No. But United States was offered off-ramp because superpowers, especially nuclear superpowers, they move in a different dimension. I speak about it nonstop. United States still remains nuclear superpower, and Russians will talk on it on their, regular basis because they have to. They must. Europe, no. Europe is not the subject of international relations. It's an object. It's the continent and civilization on the verge of the complete implosion. It's cultural implosion, immigration. There are all kinds of things happening there. Militarily, they are pathetic. They are. Was the arms race which it did. Europe is not even in the same league as the United States. They don't have any real serious military, industrial, scientific potential to come up with any kind of their modern weapon system, let alone to have them in proper quantities as to say, look at us, we have the weight. They don't. Bundeswehr is a joke. France, if you remove the nuclear deterrent, is a joke. I mean, what? Foreign Legion, really? I mean, those are boys which will be rolled into the dirt immediately if they even try to do anything. United Kingdom, we know Lilliputian armed forces. So who else? United Kingdom cannot put together the armor brigade until 2028. Single brigade, they cannot even put that together. So, and when you look at actually Spain, so okay, they have some air forces out of 192 Rafales and whatever they have left in French Air Force, half of it is used for the cannibalization of the, so you look at this is what, I don't know what they're trying to pretend they can do. They can't do nothing except for the grandiose statements, waving hands, chest thumping, but realistically, many people do not understand that. First, they are incompetent militarily. Average, probably, I don't remember I don't know if you remember it, but about half a year ago, there was a Swedish commander from Swedish General Staff. He was taken prisoner of war by Russians. He had Estonian security detail, no less. Obviously, Russian special forces disposed of them like. They took the guy, and he was literally shocked when he was presented with, he was on the interrogation, and he was saying, Russians, why didn't you retreat from here? You are supposed to. He said, who told you that we're supposed to do anything? This is war, dude. This is not your, studying and, memorizing all those field manuals, which have nothing in common with the realities of the 21st century warfare. He couldn't understand that his operational views are those of the, I don't know how they think. They're amateurs, literally. And so the only reason, essentially, United States still remains in the ISR position, but Europe have been thoroughly deindustrialized and demilitarized. They have nothing more to give. Neither does United States. So they want patriots. Sure, let them give whatever the patriots they have. But the problem is, what else can you give to them? Well, unless you go into the first line of the basically U.S. Army and whatever they call armies in the West, and literally begin to take out the front line, the first line units, formations, their equipment. That means what? Complete militarization. This equipment obviously doesn't matter if they send it there, it will be annihilated really fast. And that's the whole thing. That from the get-go, it was the suicide by the cop by the West. Just didn't understand that,
So that's across the board now. You see the military understanding, and that leads into the diplomatic. But I almost hesitate to say this because it's just almost not even fair. But you see, whether you're talking about Sergei Lavrov or Ryabkov or some of the others that are in the Russian sphere of diplomacy, then you look at the leading diplomatic voice for Europe. You know what's coming.
Oh, good.
The talks in Geneva once again showed that Russia is not moving away from its maximalist demands. By most measures, the war has grown even more brutal for Ukraine over the past year. Russia is dragging out negotiations rather than moving towards peace. We also need to shift the narrative to the one who is actually responsible for this war. So we need to also see the concessions from the Russian side in order to have a sustainable peace. Next Monday, we aim to adopt the 20th sanctions package against Russia. Sanctions are working. They are severely hurting Russia's economy, and each new measure further limits its ability to wage the war.
Yeah, boy, according to her, man, Russia's just on their last legs, and they're just going to collapse at any moment. What do you say to that?
Well, I mean, she's an imbecile, okay? There is a very popular... first, when Mr. Lavrov or Mr. Peskov says that even Marco Rubio doesn't want to meet her. I mean, but again, European Commission is the collection of these imbeciles. Von der Leyen, she is the specialist in the child care, whatever, doctor. She was the defense minister in Germany. What do you expect? Gynecologist, did a trick on Bundeswehr, not that it wasn't declining anyway. So, and that's the level of the European elites, European ruling class. That's how it looks like. That's who they are for the most part. And this has to be understood. And now they are in full panic mode. And as a result, And again, there's a famous meme now, which I love. I'm going to be making video. There is a famous X-ray of Homer Simpson head with the small brain there. And then there is also the profile of Kaja Kallas. I mean, it's embarrassing, but again, Europeans don't have honor. Their elites don't have honor. They are fighting for their survival. And again, that's who they are.
Here's what puzzles me, though. I mean, a lot of this stuff is for domestic purposes, a lot of for domestic audiences. They want to sound tough. It's, Russia's dragging this out, she said in that soundbite. She says that often. They don't really want peace. What, of course, that means is they don't want peace according to Ukraine's preference. So certainly they don't want that. But that's one thing. That's for a front-leaning audience. But then this idea that, well, we want to have these negotiations because Russia has to be made to make concessions. It can't just be the Ukraine side that makes concessions. Now, you and I know that that's absurd. Why would the position in power ever make concessions to the weaker power? It's nonsense. But if that, I fear that actually is something that she believes, and she thinks that somehow it has leverage. And if that's where you're negotiating, you're almost guaranteeing that the side you're representing is going to lose even more.
Yeah, that's exactly. You are absolutely correct. Actually, conditions are hardened only since then, And I mean, it cannot get any clearer. Mr. Lavrov himself and Peskov, who is the essentially the voice of Kremlin, official voice of Kremlin, they say that Europeans are not going to be there, period. It's not between Europe and Russia. I mean, it is in sort of way, but Europe has to be defeated. It is defeated militarily. They are impotent. They have been utterly demilitarized, which, by the way, opens the road to path for American weapons, which Europeans do not want to buy. But now Trump insists, which was the plan from the get-go, even during the Biden administration. That was But they have no subjectivity, period. They are object. They will be dealt with. European Union is a dead man walking, so is NATO. And that was their, basically, as I already stated, Russians just need to roll the ball down their, basically down the slope. After that, it rolls and, creates all kinds of its own realities. That will be, of course, the cessation of Ukraine as a real state, which probably gonna separate into even more, areas, with classic historic Ukraine around Kiev being the only thing which is Ukraine. And after that, we'll see the new dynamics in Europe and in Russian-American relations, which will be not called peace. It will be still Cold War, but at least we know for now we're not going to get, which is the only achievement of Trump administration when, despite the fact that he still sabotaged every single off-ramp Russians offer. So, and other than that,
you mentioned a second ago some of Dmitry Peskov's comments about Kaja Kallas. For those who may not have seen it, maybe they should watch this.
Отстранила требования к России. Что мы должны сделать, на ее взгляд? Ограничить свои вооруженные силы и много чего еще мы должны сделать, на взгляд Каи Каллас.
Я думаю, что полномочия госпожи Каи Каллас не являются веком золотой дипломатии для европейского континента.
I couldn't help, and one of the reasons I chose to play that particular version is because as the reporter's asking the question, you can see this shy little smile come on his face, and he's kind of like he's talking about a little child he wants to pat on the head.
It is. That's what it is. And she is a meme in Russia. People not only mock her, they laugh openly at. So yeah, it's pathetic. That's the whole point, and they couldn't find anyone better, And you look at all of them across the board. Today there is the prime minister of Baru or whatever the name of this French dude. He was also threatening Russia and demanding something from Russia. France is a pipsqueak. I mean, remove their indigenous nuclear deterrent. They are nothing militarily. They have some, some technological things which are happening there. Obviously, Airbus being the European consortium, it's not just French. So other than that, I mean, look at France, look at Paris. It reeks of look what is happening there with immigration. At least British they in Manchester, they had a large manifestation yesterday. They tried to get country back to, I don't know if they will succeed. But France, they killed they call it right wing. He's not right wing. He's just normal, French guy who tried to, warn about the situation, what is happening in France. And guess what? It's okay to kill him. Immigrants killed him. They just disposed of this guy. So yeah, it's complete madhouse. It's satanic playfield there, and Europeans have been asleep. And I'm afraid, or maybe not afraid anymore. It's too late for them to react, and the countries are basically, circling the drain. Germany certainly did. It's over for Germany. And France, some people give it 2050, as I did. Some others say that's 2035, then they will disintegrate as a country. Essentially, so that's the dynamics. That's the dynamics.
That's the dynamics in Europe. But let's take a look at the other side of that equation here, and whether this should or will influence the negotiating patterns and the people's willingness to acknowledge reality. I have grave doubts about it, but this is what, at the occasion of the Armed Forces Day, I believe it was, in Russia on the 23rd, you had Vladimir Putin lay out this vision, I think, for where he sees Russia going. And interestingly, he's almost looking beyond this conflict already into where he wants to go next.
Dear comrades, we will continue the large-scale work on strengthening the Army and Navy, taking into account the development of the international situation based on the combat experience gained in the course of the special military operation, relying on the powerful forces of our industry, science, industrial, and high-tech companies. The development of the nuclear triad, which serves as a guarantee of Russia's security and allows for the effective provision of strategic deterrence and the balance of forces in the world, remains an unconditional priority. We will qualitatively increase the potential of all other branches and types of the armed forces.
One of the things that really stood out to me about that was something you said earlier in this broadcast, that you talk to the United States, even though you think that a lot of our leaders are imbeciles, because you have to, because we're a global power. Why in the world is that not reciprocated? Because Russia, whether people like them or not, they are a superpower. They are the world's biggest nuclear superpower. And then, as President Putin just outlaid there, in terms of the conventional armed forces, what they have done, how they have strengthened, how they have grown since that time, since this war began, and where that's going forward. Why do we still not take them serious? Because many people still, to this day, at the 4th anniversary of this conflict here, still say Russia their knees are wobbly, they're about to fall economically. Why do we not ascribe that so that we can come up with an end to this that's going to cut off our losses and give us a chance to start rebuilding instead of deepening our losses?
Well, because of incompetence, American Academy, which dabbles into their, I always use this example of Sarah Payne. She's a historian with zero tactical or operational experience. She teaches in the U.S. Naval War College strategy. She knows nothing about strategy. She is a typical, obnoxious, Sovietologist, if you wish. She doesn't know Russia. She has been there in 1990s. And so those people are incompetent. They do not understand war. Their American military education is collapsing, essentially. And so when you have those people like Mark Milley, and people of the scale of Petraeus, what do you expect? Obviously, you have all kinds of the amateurs running to Trump and singing him into one ear. The guy just posted the tweet or whatever, the X, whatever, the True Social, I completely don't remember them, yesterday. He says, so much winning, aren't you tired from it's like, dudes, wake up, for crying out loud. And that's why I have many friends and American officers who are my dearest friends, senior officers, and we respect each other as humans, as professionals. It's obviously we're older generation of professionals, so, and cold warriors, so to speak. And they say, why didn't they invite you to teach in, like, let's say, Annapolis? Or I said, they will not tolerate me for more than 2-3 lectures, and the question because I'm going to basically break their world, and they do not like that because they need to completely review the history, everything they know about whatever they think is the war, not to take away from, as I constantly repeat, that there are many competent and courageous people in U.S. armed forces, like officers. And
well, I was going to say, yeah. They no one would want you in there for that reason. They got rid of Doug McGregor, who was
exactly so
nice one, because they don't even want insider telling that. Well, listen, I'm sorry, we're running short on time here. I've got maybe 1 minute left. Let me just ask, in the coming year here, however these negotiations work out right now, where do you see this war going?
Well, I'm obviously not Cassandra, but from what I know, there is a talk in Russian armed forces that, that's the last year, most likely, and probably summer. That's after that, who knows? We already see what is happening there in terms of their critical, and no matter what they do, they are being crushed every day, essentially.
Yeah, so. It's just hard to see. I mean, you just physically can't keep going on once you don't have enough troops, and we'll see how that plays out. But listen, thank you so much for coming on. Remind everybody to go to Smoothie X12 to see more of Andrei Martyanov, so you don't have to wait till he gets back on this show here. He's always got great stuff. Thank you very much. We appreciate it. We will see
pleasure.
We will see you on the next episode of the Daniel Davis Deep Dive.